Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be looking at all those arguments that are made against trade protection. Now, the first argument that is made against trade protection is basically the retaliation by the retaliation by the trading partners. Now, obviously, we know that while trade protection will help benefit domestic industries, but it is going to harm those foreign producers. We also saw in the previous diagram how foreign producers' revenues are falling, and they will not like that. So, the biggest problem with using protectionism, which is done to protect domestic industries and to close a trade deficit, especially if a country is having a large trade deficit. And the problem with that is the possibility of retaliation by trading partners. Because your trading partners or foreign countries will frown upon the fact that their exporters of their countries and their economy are made to suffer because you have a trade deficit in a different country, or you have a trade deficit. I mean, their exporters and their economy are made to suffer due to a trade deficit in a different country. And obviously, they will not react kindly to any protection that is imposed on them. So, retaliation would take place in this case where protectionism would be enacted back or implemented or back on the initial country's imports, right? For example, if country A is importing from country A is importing from country B, then country B might impose retaliatory tariffs on country A, and which might be more severe than the tariffs imposed by country A on B. B might impose severe tariffs back at A, which may culminate into a trade war. So, retaliation would take place where protectionism will be enacted back on the initial country's imports into the country who is suffering right now in a more strongly manner and more strongly, which will actually reduce countries' export revenues more compared to whatever import expenditures it has saved. What I'm trying to say is that if A is imposing a tariff on B, so A is saving import expenditure because A's imports are going down that were being imported from B. So A is saving import expenditure. That's a good thing. A is saving on import expenditure, current account deficits will reduce and current account balances of A will improve. But B imposes a much stronger, severe retaliatory tariff on A. And so A was also exporting to B. So A's exports are now suffered. And exports are suffering, the export of A are suffering more than the amount of savings in import expenditure that it had done. So if import expenditure is going down, but export revenues decline much more than the import expenditures that had gone down, so net exports goes down, AD goes down, real GDP goes down, employment would be affected, current account deficit worsens. Instead of current account deficit being improved, the current account deficit just end up worsening itself. So this is how it distorts the entire purpose. It's an unintended consequence. So what I am saying is that if the country imposes a retaliatory tariff such that is more stronger, then the country's export revenue would suffer more than the amount of import expenditure it had saved, which will worsen the country's trade deficit. It will worsen the country's current account deficit. And as if this starts happening, then country A may retaliate back then. And protectionism can therefore be argued to culminate into a tit for tat, punitive retaliation. It can end into a trade war where no one benefits. It's a zero-sum game for all the parties involved. Now, what is zero-sum game? I think you just got the point what it is, but in A2, we're going to be discussing that. But you don't need to mention it here. But what we're saying is that if it culminates into a tit-for-tat retaliation, then it will culminate into a trade war where no one will benefit. Got it? The second disadvantage is that, so don't just think, because in the advantages you're writing that, okay, fine, trade deficit improves. But if trade war starts or if retaliatory tariffs that are more stronger are imposed, then trade deficit will suffer instead of being improved. It will worsen basically. Second is increased prices for consumers and a deadweight loss of CS, consumer surplus. Protectionism, such as especially tariffs, will increase the price for consumers, and that results into a deadweight loss of consumer surplus. We know that. We saw that in the previous video. And the reason is obviously the tariff is a tax on imports. It increases the price of imported goods. And see, what are the key imports into a country? They include clothing, food, vehicles, manufactured goods, electronics, and a lot of them are those goods, maybe medicines, maybe some of the food as well. So uh, uh, these are some of these goods are goods that the poor rely on, and the poor would end up spending a greater proportion of their income on these import of basic necessities, let's say. So these tariffs can therefore have a significant impact on the lower income groups, especially if they include the import of food and medicines and some essential stuff. So in that sense, we can argue that tariffs are regressive in nature. They have, because tariffs is an indirect tax on import. It has a worsening impact on the poor rather than the rich. So they are regressive in nature. They may cause income inequality. They may widen the disparity between rich and poor in that context. And poor will suffer, their living standards will suffer, because now you have less amount of better quality imported goods. Imported goods might be of better quality. So consumers' welfare would have gone up had you allowed those imports. But now, since imports have gone down, consumers' living standards could suffer, or consumers' welfare could suffer. And technically, there's a loss of consumer surplus, or deadweight loss of consumer surplus. Uh, Protectionist measures such as tariffs can also be inflationary, leading to a conflict of macroeconomic objectives, because tariffs would increase the price of imported goods, let's say, especially if these imports consist of oil and key commodities and other important raw materials, which will increase the cost of production for those domestic businesses who are reliant on those imports. And these costs will then be passed on to the consumers via higher prices, resulting into cost push inflation in the economy. Right, so even finished goods that are imported into the country will be imported in at a higher price, which will again increase the prices overall in the economy, and thus there would be inflationary pressures felt. But yes, cost push inflation is a very strong point to mention. Protectionism also worsens the world allocation of resources. We saw that in the previous video, and this is because protectionism promotes more local domestic production when domestic producers do not necessarily have the competitive advantage. So as a result, what we witness is more resources being going to such producers. More resources will be going to those producers who are less efficient, compared to more resources being diverted and going to those producers who are more efficient. That is the foreign producers, and consequently, that's a misallocation of world's resources. It represents inefficient allocation of world's resources. It represents world inefficiency. Got it? Also, certain forms of protectionism are costly, especially domestic subsidies. They carry a severe opportunity cost, because you see, the government needs to fund that money of subsidies, and if that money is borrowed, debt will rise. The national debt of the economy will rise. Again, the government. So also, maybe if the government is spending that money in subsidies right now, so maybe it needs to fund that money through increasing taxes in the future. So taxes in the future will have to rise then. And if those taxes are indirect taxes, such as VAT, or let's say fuel duties, if they go up to fund part of the spending, and these taxes are regressive, VAT and fuel duties are regressive, then it will especially hurt the poor, worsening income inequality, which is again income equality is a major macroeconomic objective, and if that is hurt, then it conflicts with the macroeconomic objective. So although on one end you're protecting your trade deficits, you're improving your current account deficit, but then you're worsening income inequality, because you are protecting domestic producers, you're protecting infant industry, you're also giving subsidies to domestic producers, including exporters. And all right, that's fine, but then can you afford these subsidies in the long term? Are they sustainable? And if you need to increase taxes in the future, especially regressive taxes, that hurts the poor, right, causing income inequality. Also, subsidies has an opportunity cost. If the government funds these policies through cutting spending in other areas of the economy, such as essential spending like healthcare, education, once more the negative impacts of these essential spending will be suffered more by the lower income groups. A very important point that you can write is the last one. If PD for imported goods is inelastic, it makes protectionism less effective, because if imported goods have an inelastic PED, let's say medicines, and you import a tariff on them, obviously the quantity of imports will not reduce, or they may reduce by a very insignificant amount. So the quantity of imports will decrease proportionately less than the rise in the price after tariffs, reducing the impact of tariffs and decreasing the overall size of the imports, and also reducing the impact of the tariffs in reducing import expenditures. And if import expenditures are not going to go down by the amount or extent that we expected, and current account deficits will not go down by the amount or extent that we expected, or the current account balances will not improve by the amount or extent that we expected, or the trade deficits will not improve by the amount or extent that we expected, then the policy, we need to look into that whether the policy was effective or not. So these are all disadvantages and limitations that you can mention. That ends the topic of protectionism, and now we're going to be starting with comparative and absolute advantage. I'll see you all in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Until then, take care.